one.
Hi, my name is Eric Vasquez, and I'm going to be talking about juvenile life without parole. According to ourtime.org, the United States is the only country in the world that sentences juveniles to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This means that children as young as 13 can be sentenced to life in prison. What some overlook is that life in prison is equivalent to death in prison. Sentencing juveniles to life without parole is a practice that has been ruled both cruel and inhumane under international and U.S. law. However, it is still being practiced. All of us in this room are living in the United States, and I hope I'm not the only one who's appalled by the fact that it is still being practiced. I'm here to show you that life without parole for juveniles is unconstitutional because the brain is not fully developed, and many of these children come from broken homes, and my solution is rehabilitation. But before we get into that, let's break down what life without parole means. A juvenile is an individual under the age of 18 years old. Parole is the release of a prisoner before the completion of their sentence with a promise of good behavior. Therefore, juveniles being sentenced to life without parole means that a convicted minor can be sentenced to die in a prison with absolutely no hope of release. Now I'm going to tell you why this is wrong. Under most laws in the United States, young people are considered adults at the age of 18. According to ScienceHealthDaily.com, it's proven that the human brain does not completely reach maturity until the age of 25. The fact that our brains aren't developed until the mid-20s means that legal adults, those that are 18 or older, are allowed to make adult decisions without fully mature brains, and minors who are committing heinous crimes are doing so with immature brains. The prefrontal cortex, which is the main part of the brain, is still developing. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for complex planning, which is an underdeveloped prefrontal region that means that your planning capabilities haven't been solidified. Decision making, our brain weighs the risks and tells us whether a certain behavior choice is a good idea versus a bad one. Impulse control, the ability to maintain self-discipline and avoid impulsive behaviors, hasn't reached a peak until the 20s. Logical thinking, justifying behaviors based off of emotions rather than logic, is common among teens. When the prefrontal cortex fully develops, logical thinking simultaneously improves. And risk management, the ability to assess risky situations and determine whether they will result in long-term benefit, and many more. Here are some examples that show that juveniles did not understand the magnitude of their actions. Example number one, the Slender Man stabbings. Two 12-year-old girls stabbed their best friend in an attempt to kill her to please Slender Man, a fictional online monster. One girl stated, "I didn't know what I did, it just sort of happened," and they believed that if they didn't kill their friend, Slender Man would kill them and their families. After stabbing their victims, the girls ran through the woods in search of Slender Man's home. Both were competent to stand trial. What this shows about their brain development: their brains and decision-making was not developed. They could not decipher whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. Their impulse control was lacking. They acted on impulse instead of thinking clearly about their actions. And risk management, because they failed to realize that killing their friend would not benefit them in the long-term run because of their permanent damage instead. Example number two, 10-year-old homicide. 10-year-old Tristan Carrillo walked into his 90-year-old grandmother's room to ask her a question. An argument ensued which ended in Tristan beating his grandmother while holding a cane against her neck. Moments later after the fight, she was dead. Again, an underdeveloped impulse control caused Tristan to act out. Instead of logically reacting to the situation, Tristan reacted under emotion of anger, proving that an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that gives you logical reasoning. An opposition would be that experts say that children as young as 6 years old know the difference between right from wrong and have developed moral compass. This might be true, but knowing the difference between right and wrong is not equivalent to knowing the magnitude of their actions. My second argument is that according to Lehigh University of Psychology, 70% of youth who commit crimes come from broken and unstable homes. Adolescents with a history of abuse and neglect often turn to committing crimes to lash out, often hurting others to gain control. Example one is Cyntoia Brown. Cyntoia Brown was moved into foster care after she was raped and molested by members of her family. Her mother was a crack addict and was constantly in and out of jail. Cyntoia ran away from home and ended up being solicited for sex. She shot and killed her pet and is currently serving a life sentence in jail. Violence and abuse was all she knew, and she liked being with older men and they took control of her. Not everyone who comes from a broken home ends up a criminal. Take Oprah, for example. She grew up in a home with two single parents. Although there are some cases where this is not the fact, it is undeniable that the majority of youths detained for crime come from broken homes. Abuse, rape, neglect, even prostitution can wreak serious havoc on still developing brains. Children brought up in families like this feel like this is the norm. My solution would be rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is the best solution to adolescent crime. Trying children as adults when they do not possess the mental capacity to understand the weight of their choices should be a crime in itself. A vast majority of incarcerated juveniles serving life sentences have no education, have no work skills or adult habits. They are thrust into this adult prison with no real comprehension of what their life is going to consist of for the next 50 years. Rehabilitation gives them a real chance at becoming productive members of society and truly exonerate them of their crimes. Take example here, Tory Adamczyk, sentenced to life without parole. He says who he was and who he is are two different people. He's completely in denial. Adam feels like he's paying for someone else's mistake. Growing into a man and developing into a rational, logical person has opened his eyes to the crime he had committed and the severity of his punishment. Rehabilitation would be very expensive for taxpayers as a common opposition to this. It would be expensive at first, although rehabilitating a juvenile for the first few years to be reintroduced into society would be far less expensive than feeding, clothing, and housing someone for 50 years. Here I have a cost comparison of 90 days of incarceration versus 90 days of rehabilitation, where $415,800 is how much it costs to keep someone in jail, fed, clothed, and alive, as opposed to rehabilitation, which would only be $113,000 over the course of 90 days. In conclusion, imprisoning young children is not only unethical, it is a severe waste of resources and an unfortunate waste of life. Not only are the convicts' minds not developed enough to understand the scope of their actions, but the punishment is so severe that they may as well be sentenced to death. Imagine spending the entirety of your life suffering for something you did not fully understand. The focus should be on the child's best interests and the potential for his or her successful reintegration into society, not a life wasted to satisfy a court ruling. Thank you.